This meeting will come to order. Today we have a hearing titled The Role and Performance of FDA in Ensuring Food Safety. The chairman, ranking members, and chairman emeritus will be recognized for a 5-minute opening statement. Other members of the subcommittee will be recognized for a 3-minute opening statement. I will begin. Today's hearing will mark the 12th hearing of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee since January 2007 regarding food safety issues. We have examined an E. coli outbreak traced to tainted spinach, melamine-contaminated pet food, and the industry practice of intentional exposure of meat and seafood to carbon monoxide, among other inquiries. During this Congress, the subcommittee has held hearings on a salmonella outbreak associated with peanut products manufactured by the Peanut Corporation of America, and actions and obligations of food manufacturers and retailers that purchase tainted food products, and the safety of bottled water. Today we'll continue our oversight role and performance in the food safety system by considering 2 reports. The first is a Government and Accountability Office report entitled Food Safety: Agencies Need to Address Gaps in Enforcement and Collaboration to Enhance Safety of Imported Foods. GAO found that despite the efforts and actions of the 3 federal agencies that share jurisdiction over imported food, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, the U.S. Department of Ag's Food Safety and Inspection Service, and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, there are gaps in the enforcement and collaboration that could allow high-risk foods to enter domestic commerce without assurance that products are safe. Specifically, the GAO found the 3 agencies failed to collaborate and to share food-related data effectively. FDA's authority to ensure importer compliance is limited. The agencies lack the ability to assign unique identification numbers for importing firms, and CBP faces challenges managing inbound shipments. The second report, FDA Inspections of Domestic Food Facilities, was issued by the Department of Health and Human Services, Office of the Inspector General. The report identifies a number of challenges confronting FDA in safeguarding domestically produced food. OIG found that, on an average, FDA inspects only 24% of domestic food facilities annually, and that the number of inspections declined from 2004 to 2008. The report also found that FDA has not inspected 56% of the food facilities under its jurisdiction during the past 5 years. The Inspector General found that, and I quote, when violations were identified, FDA did not routinely take swift and effective action to ensure that these violations were remedied, end of quote. Additionally, the report found that some companies had violations at their facilities significant enough to warrant regulatory action, refused to grant FDA inspectors access to their official records. I'm interested in learning more about these 2 reports and what proactive steps the GAO and Inspector General believes FDA could be taking to ensure the safety of our nation's food supply. I'm also interested in hearing from FDA on the recent steps it has taken to reinvigorate its focus on food safety and to improve and enhance food safety oversight. The work of this subcommittee, coupled with the work of the Health Subcommittee and the full Committee on Food Safety, culminated in the introduction and passage of the H.R. 2749, the Food Safety Enhancement Act, which passed the House of Representatives on July 30th, 2009. The provisions contained in H.R. 2749 would address several concerns raised by GAO. For example, Section 204 of the bill requires all food importers to register with FDA annually, comply with good importer practices, and pay a registration fee of $500 in order to ship food to the United States. Section 206 requires that registered facilities have a unique facility identifier, or they will not be allowed to import food into the country. I'm interested in hearing from our witnesses how H.R. 2749 could help address the concerns raised in the 2 reports before us today. Our witnesses today include the authors of the 2 reports. Lisa Shamus is the Director of Agriculture and Food Safety at the Government Accountability Office. Jodi Nudelman is the Regional Inspector General for the Evaluation and Inspections for Region 2 at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Inspector General. Joining them on the panel will be Mike Taylor, FDA Deputy Commissioner for Foods, and Steve Solomon, Deputy Associate Commissioner for Compliance Policy from the Food and Drug Administration. The members of this subcommittee were the first to sound the alarm on the weaknesses of our food safety system. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about progress that has made since we began pushing for reform more than 3 years ago, and about the weaknesses that remain until we have an effective food safety bill enacted into law. We are fortunate that today's hearing was prompted by the HHS and GAO reports rather than another widespread food outbreak like we saw with the spinach in 207, peppers in 208, and peanut butter in 209. But make no mistake about it, without legislative action, it's only a matter of it's not a matter of if, but when more lives will be put at risk by another outbreak. We cannot afford to put off action any longer. Mr. Burgess, opening statement, please.
And I thank the chairman for the recognition, and I'm pleased to join you and the other members on the committee as we convene this hearing on the role of the Food and Drug Administration to ensure food safety for the American public. Food safety reform is relatively controversial, yet a critical issue competing for attention with a long list of domestic priorities. Last July, in a bipartisan fashion, the House passed food safety legislation. I supported the legislation because while historically the performance of the FDA has been questioned, I felt this was partly a result of inadequate tools, but the enduring role of the Food and Drug Administration today still remains a very complex question. The House legislation did not address the future progress of food inspection and whether or not the proper role of both the Food and Drug Administration and the United States Department of Agriculture to continue their bifurcated jurisdiction over food. We heard, for instance, that a food such as pizza, if it has only cheese on it, is wholly the province of the Food and Drug Administration, whereas if it has pepperoni as well, it is in the province of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. One thing is crystal clear without the controversy. The future of the FDA should not be as a reactive body dictated by the events of yesterday, but rather an effective and efficient proactive agency preventing the emergencies of tomorrow. And I agree wholeheartedly with the chairman of the subcommittee when he says it's not a question of if, but when, because as we're coming into the room for this hearing today, across the news wire from the Columbus Dispatch, federal health officials will come to Columbus this weekend to help determine what is responsible for a 3-state E. coli outbreak that has sickened at least 7 people there. So as we see, even tomorrow's headlines today are being covered in this committee. It is important for the Food and Drug Administration as well as the industry to work cooperatively to reduce the number of and help prevent foodborne illnesses and contamination before the tainted products are able to enter the markets. The Food and Drug Administration should make maximum use of information technologies for risk assessment, but it has come to my attention and the attention of the committee that the Food and Drug Administration has delayed the rollout of the promising new system, Predict. Predict uses a variety of assessments to rank food import shipments according to risk. The system is currently in use in New York and Los Angeles, but the nationwide deployment was recently postponed indefinitely because of technical problems. And this is not the first time that we've heard of the failure of the Food and Drug Administration to keep pace with changes in technology. From the failures of the 510K medical device process, to the backlog of new drug applications, to the entire portfolio of food issues, the Food and Drug Administration regulates fully 25% of all government activity, yet the Food and Drug Administration remains technologically in the 1990s. This is why scientific innovation and information technology must play a central role in the prevention and the strategic analysis that is essential to a successfully functioning Food and Drug Administration. We're going to hear from 4 witnesses today, including 2 from the agency itself. And although much has been said about the past limitations of the agency and the uptick in funding shortfalls from a year ago, I do not believe that it is simply a resource question and that simply increasing the resources of the Food and Drug Administration will solve the problems outlined before us today. After numerous hearings, we have learned that simply providing more money to FDA will not, by itself, result in a safer food supply. From our agricultural imports to domestic manufacturing, the Food and Drug Administration must streamline the process and internal controls to identify high-risk products and manufacturers before tainted goods are able to enter the food supply, while continuing to collaborate with their counterparts at the USDA and the Customs and Border Protection. The Food and Drug Administration internal communications between Washington and their regional offices at home and abroad must be increased. Communication may not create the perfect system, but it will create a more reliable and a more efficient one. I am also interested in an update of the issues that still hinder work of the FDA and any new ideas you may have to foster innovation to improve the agency as a whole. As Commissioner Hamburg recently said, it is simply not possible for FDA to inspect our way to safety. Congress must advocate for an all-of-the-above approach in addressing food safety solutions. We must support and advocate for the FDA to continue to advocate for risk-based approaches to the inspection and testing processes, as well as support improvements to modernize scientific standards, safety controls, and information technology. While these update reports from the Government Accountability Office and from Health and Human Services Inspector General are helpful, their reports do not change the conversation regarding this domestic priority. Food safety is important. Food safety legislation has passed the House. Food safety is now awaiting Senate action. So I hope today's hearing is not just to continue to put pressure on the Senate to act for food safety. It is my understanding that the Senate is already planning to vote on this issue as soon as the financial services bill is finished. I hope instead we also ask questions about whether the progress and the evolution of food safety requires more advancements than red tape bureaucracy than the government will logically allow. I'd like to thank the chairman again, and I look forward to the testimony of our witnesses and to our questions. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Mr. Waxman, full committee chairman, opening statement, please, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to commend you for calling this important hearing and to examine the role of FDA in protecting the nation's food supply. Today we're going to hear from two reports, one from GAO, the other from HHS Inspector General, about the FDA performance. These two reports tell a story of an agency that is trying to keep the food supply safe but needs new authorities, more effective tools, and increased funding to meet its obligation. In GAO's report, it found that FDA needs to coordinate its enforcement efforts better with other agencies. For example, FDA and Customs and Border Protection should be able to work together to assign a unique identification number to firms that import our food. This is currently not the case. In fact, there are some that have more than the 3 identifiers, and GAO found one firm had 75. These multiple identifiers make it more difficult for FDA to track foods that are imported. GAO also questioned whether FDA's current penalties are sufficient to keep an importer from violating FDA requirements. The OIG report focused on FDA's inspection of domestic food facilities. They found that FDA inspected only 24% of food facilities each year between 2004 and 2008. The number of FDA inspections declined during that time, even as the number of facilities increased. Over the course of 5 years, FDA failed to inspect 56% of facilities that were subject to its authority and only inspected an additional 14%. These two reports are very disturbing. It's a similar story to what we heard last year. We were told in the 2 hearings on salmonella outbreak in peanut butter that sickened over 700 people, and the investigators revealed, executives at the Peanut Corporation of America knew their peanuts were testing positive for salmonella, but they chose to ship the tainted food anyway. Many of the concerns raised in these 2 reports and in the wake of the salmonella outbreak are addressed by the Food Safety Enhancement Act of 2009, which the House passed on a bipartisan basis. The legislation contains critical fixes. I'm pleased that we're holding this important hearing. I hope the Senate will act soon. We'll have this new legislation in place, and I hope we'll see, through the efforts of legislation and oversight, a more comprehensive food safety regimen at FDA. Thank you for holding the hearing. Yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Latta for 3 minutes. We'll try to get them in.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Burgess. First of all, thanks for holding this subcommittee hearing on this Food and Drug Administration ensuring food safety. And it's also an honor being recently appointed to the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I look forward to working with you on the important issues that come before the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee. Instances of contaminated food products are a serious concern for the public. Just last week, the FDA announced that contaminated materials were used in production of several lots of pediatric Tylenol products about 1,500 lots of the bottled products are currently being recalled. Furthermore, as the percentage of U.S. food supply imported from foreign countries increases and bioterrorism continues to be a threat, food safety is a critically important issue. Last summer, the House debated H.R. 2749, the Food Safety Enhancement Act, and it is expected that the Senate will soon take action on the legislation. I represent the largest agricultural district in the state of Ohio and am a member of the House Agriculture Committee. I believe that H.R. 2749 did not adequately address the concerns of the agriculture community, nor was it referred to the Agriculture Committee at that time for any hearings. Additionally, the Congressional Budget Office estimates that H.R. 2749 will authorize $2.314 billion over fiscal years 2010 through 2014, and that will take $3.5 billion for the FDA to administer the new regulatory activities under the legislation at that time. The spending level authorized by H.R. 2749 is of great concern, especially when the September 2009 GAO report found that gaps in enforcement and collaboration currently undermine food safety efforts among Customs and Border Patrol, the FDA, USDA's Food and Safety Inspection Services. Furthermore, the same report indicates there is a lack of information sharing between the FDA and states during a recall, which impedes states' efforts to quickly remove contaminated food. The safety and security of the nation's food supply is of utmost importance. However, with 15 federal agencies already administering at least 30 federal laws concerning food safety, I'm concerned of the prospect of an increased size in the bureaucracy, budget, and statutory authority for the FDA when improvements in communication, collaboration, and technology have been recommended by the GAO. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to hearing the testimony from the witnesses on the panel today, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Latta. Good to have you on board. Look forward to working with you. Ms. Christensen, for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you. I'll try to be shorter than that. Every year, 300,000 people in this country are hospitalized and 5,000 die after consuming contaminated food or beverages. So thank you, Chairman Stupak and Ranking Member Burgess, for following up on this issue. It's very important that we explore the weaknesses in the food safety network and the coordination or lack of it between CBP, FSIS, and FDA, as well as any new authorities these agencies might need. So I just look forward to hearing the testimony of our witnesses and to working with the subcommittee and the larger committee to address the gaps in our food safety system. And thank you, Chairman Stupak, once again for holding this hearing on this issue that is really vital to the safety and health of everyone who lives in this country.
Well, thank you, and we have 2 minutes left to vote. We have a series of votes. There's 4 votes plus a motion to recommit, so we're going to stand in recess until 3:15. So this committee will be in recess till 3:15.